Hello, I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington, D.C. From the BBC World Service, this is The Global Story. The 2024 U.S. presidential race is in full swing, with Kamala Harris poised to officially accept her nomination at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago with her newly minted vice presidential pick, Tim Walz. So today we're asking how her candidacy has changed the face of the campaign since Joe Biden stepped aside and endorsed her as his preferred successor. What does polling tell us about how the vice president could fare in November? Has she been able to forge new pathways to the White House in the swing states that matter? And can she convince the crucial voters she needs to be able to beat Donald Trump? With me today is Courtney Subramanian from the BBC's digital team. She's been covering Kamala Harris for years. Courtney, great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Sumi.
And we're also joined by Eli Yokley, U.S. politics analyst at Morning Consult. That's a data intelligence company that runs polling around the presidential election. Hey, Eli.
Hey, good to be here.
Okay, let's get started. And Courtney, I want to start with you. Rewind to that moment, to the weeks leading up to President Biden dropping out of the race. It feels like a year ago, but this was just a few weeks ago.
You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. There's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now.
During that time, you were with Kamala Harris on the road. Was there a sense that you had that she was gearing up for a possible campaign of her own?
It is an impossible question for her. One, of course, that I put to her, the press pool put to her, and of course she brushed off that Joe Biden was the candidate. There couldn't really be any daylight between her and the president. She had to show this sort of unwavering loyalty, because if he decided to stay in the race, of course, she's on the ticket with him. She's the number two. If he decided, as he ultimately did, to step aside, she is obviously the heir apparent, and there's nothing that Joe Biden values more than loyalty. So, in those moments, we were watching her, we were, putting questions to her. She understood that she was very much, under the magnifying glass, that in some ways it was an audition for her candidacy. But I think a lot of the strategy, the infrastructure planning, that was happening outside of her office. That was happening among allies who were sort of gearing up. I remember at the time speaking to a source who told me, the game is afoot. So I think that was there, it was happening, but she had to very much put some distance between herself and who was planning outside of her office.
What a tightrope to walk indeed. Really interesting. Before we get to the campaign itself, I want to talk about the challenges Kamala Harris faced by entering the campaign so late. So staying with you, Courtney, Kamala Harris's team, they had a long to-do list, a very short amount of time, vetting her running mate, but also dealing with making sure that her name is on the ballot, that she has ad slots, this and that. To what extent does this shortened campaign present more challenges?
It's a Herculean task, as you said. There are a lot of components to this. She had to make sure that she had enough delegates to, secure the nomination. She had to make sure that she had the support of the party, tamp down on anyone who was thinking about challenging her. She had to re-secure a lot of the endorsements they had already locked up for Biden. And of course, make sure that donors, big donors, were on her side and understood that she could carry the campaign. So there was a lot to do in these last 3 weeks, but I think she also had the benefit of inheriting the infrastructure and the staff and the big, war chest of money from Biden, at her disposal. So that was helpful. And I think in some ways, actually, the more condensed campaign has played to her advantage. This sudden jolt of energy within the Democratic Party that we've seen with her campaigning over the last week. She hasn't had to really articulate her vision for the party, for the country. So she's been able to capitalize on the energy without, actually articulating what she wants to be as a candidate for the party.
Has some Americans speculating whether these short burst campaigns are actually better for the country. Eli, she took over from Joe Biden at a time when the Democrats were trailing in the polls behind Donald Trump. Do you think it is fair to consider that a handicap, or do we think about it as polls resetting to net zero?
I think it's been a huge reset. I mean, Joe Biden faced a vibes problem in the electorate. Voters thought he was too old. They questioned his mental fitness, and that weighed on how voters considered everything about him. Almost immediately, Kamala Harris entered the race with more trust to handle almost any issue we ask about, simply because she wasn't Joe Biden.
What about name recognition, Eli? Voters had been preparing for the prospect of a Trump Biden rematch for a long time. And Kamala Harris has been described by some as a blank slate, even though she was vice president, of course, or has been vice president until now. Was profile considered a problem for her?
I mean, she kind of was a blank slate. A lot of voters knew her name, but a lot of views about her weren't that strong. That's a very nice upside when you're starting a campaign this late. It gives her a lot of ground to define herself very quickly with voters in positive terms, and it's working. I mean, we've been tracking favorability ratings for the presidential candidates since November of 2022. And for the first time, the Democratic nominee has had a favorable rating above water. More voters like her than dislike her. That never happened for Joe Biden. It's not happened for Donald Trump. She's really leaned into this opportunity that she's been given.
We might forget that her ascent to the top of the ticket actually came just after Donald Trump and the Republicans were really riding that high after the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee.
So tonight, with faith and devotion, I proudly accept your nomination for President of the United States. Thank you.
How has she been able to flip the script and wrest attention back to the Democrats?
It's been really interesting to see how she has made the campaign her own and distinguished her messaging from Joe Biden, even though she inherited a lot of his campaign. She has cut through with changing some of the messaging that she has put forth. And the Republicans are weird line, which really took off.
And by the way, don't you find some of their stuff to just be plain weird?
Is a lot different and seems a bit more effective than Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, which is was a fundamental core message of the Biden campaign. And she's sort of moved that conversation on. She has tried to focus on, a more future forward thinking message. We can't go back. And that seems to resonate with her voters.
And as Eli said, vibes, the sense of joy and euphoria that we're seeing now on the Democrat side. And Eli, I know we're going to get to some more specific numbers shortly, but let's look briefly at the headline polling numbers. A Marquette poll last week had Kamala Harris ahead 53-47 among likely voters. What are you seeing in terms of national numbers? Is that margin reflected in other polls?
Yeah, it's pretty close. We do registered voters, which is a wider sample of the electorate, and we have her up 4 on Donald Trump. Almost half of voters say they support her for the presidency. That number's bigger than Joe Biden ever received since we started this tracking back in November of 2022. It's more support than Donald Trump got too. One of Joe Biden's biggest challenges in all of the polling we conducted before his exit from the race was he was not getting support from those voters, all of those voters who backed him in 2020. He was underperforming Donald Trump by that metric. Kamala Harris is competitive with this, and a lot of it's driven by young people and voters of color, these key constituencies the Democrats are really going to need to energize as they get closer to November.
Eli, how is Donald Trump reacting to her polling performance in terms of his own campaign playbook?
Well, he's called the polls fake. He says he's winning, kind of classic Donald Trump response. But, watching the former president, you can sort of see he's a bit off his game, a bit shook by this. I think Republicans and him were preparing to run against a incumbent president who had a hard time forming sentences and walking upstairs. That's not Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris has a tremendous amount of energy behind her campaign. His response to some of these crowds has been to suggest that the pictures of them are fake. You've seen President Trump attacking Kamala Harris on immigration policy, one of the Democrats' biggest weaknesses. I think there's probably an opportunity for Trump to attack Democrats on the economy. It's consistently voters' number one concern. But right now, he seems to be getting distracted by some of these grievances against the press.
Tell us more about some of these tightly contested states, Eli, and how the polls are looking there, because both the New York Times and the Cook Political Report last week had 3 critical states moving away from the Republicans and towards the Democrats.
Kamala Harris is clearly polling support at the national level, and that's breaking down to the swing state level. She's performing better than Joe Biden ever did in most of these states. Right now, Kamala Harris has a good advantage in Michigan. She has a small advantage in Arizona, Wisconsin, Nevada. Donald Trump's pretty competitive in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. Pennsylvania is going to be a big state for Democrats. It's pretty key. It's part of the blue wall, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and it's a group that has been pretty competitive in U.S. elections. This race is more competitive, but there's still a lot of work to do for Kamala Harris.
Courtney, there isn't just one pathway to the White House. There are different routes, different puzzle pieces that can be fit together. Does Vice President Harris have more avenues than Joe Biden did to win? And how does her vice presidential pick, Tim Walz, actually impact the math?
Before she took over the ticket, the Biden campaign sort of quietly acknowledged that Joe Biden's best chance of winning the White House again was through what, Eli referred to as the blue wall, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, right? It's the thinnest, narrowest pathway, but it was one that they felt was probably his best chance of winning the White House. With Harris, I think that is still possible. You mentioned the New York Times polling that showed she's ahead in those 3 crucial states. But the campaign has also suggested that the Sun Belt and southern states that, Eli was talking about, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, are now also viable pathways for her. I think he will play a role in some of these blue wall, Rust Belt states where she needs to appeal to more moderate voters or Republicans, persuadable voters, is how the campaign refers to them. He's from the Midwest. He's an affable, popular Midwest governor. He had a lot of bipartisan credibility. And so I think with Tim Walz on the ticket, the Harris campaign hopes that she can, appeal to some of those more moderate voters.
Eli, I want to talk about some of the other indicators of how people might vote, like demographics. How has Kamala Harris's entry into the campaign affected polling among women in particular?
Well, kind of like every group, Joe Biden was underperforming with women. Trump was very competitive with them when Biden was in the race. And now Kamala Harris is winning them. The 2022 elections helped her pivot to being the face of abortion policy after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. It's a good issue for her. It's a good issue for Democrats. But it's not just women, by the way. Kamala Harris is now leading with men in our daily tracking of the contest. Donald Trump has a lot of work to do to re-engage these voters in the face of the excitement that Kamala Harris has brought to the campaign.
One demographic where Donald Trump had seemed to make some progress against Joe Biden was the Black vote, and in particular, Black men. What is support like for Kamala Harris among Black voters? And is this demographic important in some of the swing states that we discussed?
There are questions about whether Kamala Harris would face challenges with her record, in law enforcement, her previous career, and her association with the incarceration of Black men. About whether she'd be able to motivate Black men to go to the polls. But one thing that she has been doing over the last year before she was named to the top of the ticket is trying to make inroads with Black voters. She has put in the work over the last year to try and, regain some of the footing that Biden has lost with Black voters.
Eli, another key group, young Hispanic voters, they represent the fastest growing portion of the U.S. electorate. Immigration is, of course, if you look at polls, a top concern for so many U.S. voters, of course, also for Latino voters. Is this a problem area for Kamala Harris, given her perceived weakness on the border?
She's doing better than Joe Biden did with Hispanic voters at the swing state level. It's almost like a 10-point advantage over the incumbent. When it comes to immigration, I think it's probably a bigger problem for Kamala Harris among white voters, a group among whom she trails Trump still. And you've seen Trump lean in to these immigration concerns that have hurt the Democratic Party for years now.
As borders are, Kamala threw open our borders and allowed 20 million illegal aliens to stampede into our country.
You know, we saw Kamala Harris on the campaign trail kind of trying to take this issue head on, referencing how Republicans killed bipartisan immigration bill on Capitol Hill at Trump's urging ahead of the election.
As president, I will bring back the border security bill that Donald Trump killed, and I will sign it into law and show Donald Trump what real leadership looks like.
She seems ready to engage on this fight publicly, but it is a massive trust issue among the American people for her and for the Democratic Party overall.
Another potential vulnerability for Harris is the Biden administration's policy on Gaza. Is this an example of the challenge for Kamala Harris in terms of distinguishing herself from Joe Biden in the same way that she's avoided in some ways discussing the economy until now?
Oh, absolutely. It's a major vulnerability for her. And I think that was evident in Detroit last week when she met with leaders of the pro-Palestinian group Uncommitted. And they had signaled that she had been open to talking about an arms embargo on Israel, which, of course, her national security advisor immediately walked back and said, you know, that was not the case. I think she has tried to perceive herself as more forceful about the need to open up aid to civilians in Gaza. She's been more forceful about, getting a deal done, but the policy remains the same. There's no daylight between her and President Biden on the U.S. policy towards Israel and the defense of Israel. So, she's walking a tightrope. She can't appear too sympathetic to Israel's critics, or she risks losing, core voters in the Democratic Party.
I want to ask you both a question about what's ahead, which is the Democratic Party's national convention next week. How important is that, starting with you, Courtney, for Kamala Harris in terms of cementing the small leads that she's built, the energy that she's built? I mean, she needs to put in a strong performance, also ahead of a debate with Donald Trump in September.
It's probably the biggest moment of her career. It's absolutely solidifying her support within the party. It's proving that she is capable of leading the party and articulating a vision and defeating Donald Trump, which, at the end of the day for the Democrats, this election, while the candidate has changed, is still very much an anti-Trump election for them.
It's an enormous opportunity, especially with Donald Trump kind of hanging out on the sidelines right now. She's been getting and will continue to get a tremendous amount of airtime to herself, and that can do wonders to her reputation. I mean, I remember back in 2020, we saw a big uptick in President Biden's favorability rating after the Democratic National Convention that maintained past Election Day. Kamala Harris has an opportunity to do that during this convention and help try to cement some of this energy behind her campaign.
Thank you both so much for joining us. Great insights. Courtney, good to have you.
Thanks for having me, Sumi.
And Eli, great to speak with you.
Yeah, anytime.
And thank you so much for watching. If you want to hear more from The Global Story, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And tell us what you think about today's episode on the comments below. Thanks for watching.